Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. How's everything, Annie? Thank you. I'm so grateful that Manny's there to be in the wizard's closet, handling everything beautifully. So I want to start with a quick Kindle update. Who was not here for the talk when I talked about a few weeks ago, the Kindle Fire and my experience with my 3-year-old? Okay, so just brief recap that I got this device for my 3-year-old so that I could read her books at night, and it could show us like picture books, on the screen. It wouldn't be so dark. And we got it, and it has this, basically the function is that when you're on the home screen, it enables you to kind of select any number of different media. So it's games, it's kind of audiobooks and books and shows and music, and you can't really turn it off. It's just like there in between. So if you download a book, you can read the book. As soon as you put the book away, then you're on that screen. And so you're sitting there next to your child and they're like, I want that, I want that, I want that. And so I was kind of expressing my frustration with this. It's like, I just want the books. So something happened recently, kind of out of the blue. I had sort of sworn it off as a nighttime activity because the screen and the movement was kind of keeping her up. But one afternoon, she was like, I want to read on the Kindle. So we had it, and I picked it up and I turned it on, and it said, Wi-Fi cannot connect. And all I saw were the books that I had downloaded. The home screen was gone. And then suddenly it connected, and then the home screen was back. And I was like, huh, what just happened? So I went and I turned off the Wi-Fi, and sure enough, that screen of enticements disappeared. And I was left with only the books that I downloaded. Did anybody know that? I was so glad. So now we have a way of perhaps utilizing it. And I forgot to mention, right after that talk, like the next day, someone was talking with me and asked me, so what was the name of the device you talked about? I want to get it for my grandkid. And I was like, no, because I was kind of saying, it's just makes them go into a different place. But with this kind of flash of insight into cutting off the connection to Amazon. I love Amazon, but sorry. The device is very useful. So I'll let you figure out what the connection is between that and the talk, because I'm not quite clear on it. But I just wanted to update you. I want to start with gratitude for Roshi Joan, the mother of this place. And I was just kind of marveling once again at this beautiful space. And then, did you even know we could do this with the lights? So she lets me play a little bit with things, and I'm just so glad that we have the space to study and practice. So thank you, Roshi, for being my teacher and for creating the space for us all. The talk title tonight is Heart to Heart with the Mother of all Buddhas. So what is the Mother of all Buddhas? This is going to be a little interactive, so you have to call it out. What's the Mother of all Buddhas? Wisdom. Prajnaparamita, true, and Prajnaparamita. And why is maybe that's too big of a question. Why is Prajnaparamita the mother of all Buddhas? Where do we hear it? Where do we hear that this Prajnaparamita is the mother of all Buddhas? Residents hear this at least weekly, if not every day sometimes. Yes, thank you, Eva, the Matriarchs chant. So when we chant the Enmei-juku Kannon-gyo, most Sundays, after that, we chant the hymn to the perfection of wisdom of our great matriarchs. And it starts with this hymn, and then it goes into reciting the names of the female ancestors from the time of the Buddha, And that's why I was thinking of Roshi, because on our lineage charts, we have these names that are mostly male ancestors, and it ends with female for us, Roshi Joan. And we also have a matriarch's lineage chart. Many of you are taking Jukai coming up in just a week, I think, is it, or 2 weeks. And the matriarch's chart has the names of women. It's not exactly a lineage in the same way, but we wanted to, or they wanted to, call out the names, those who created this beautiful document. And we continue that tradition by calling out the names of the female ancestors. And it starts with Prajnaparamita. And so this hymn, I was looking into, where does this come from? And it comes from the Prajnaparamita Sutra in 8,000 lines. Incidentally, in chapter 7 on hell. So I just thought I'd read this. It's short, but it's interesting to compare the two. How many people haven't heard the one we do, the hymn in the front of the Matriarchs lineage? Maybe I should read that one too. Okay, so here's what we chant each Sunday. Homage to the perfection of wisdom, Prajnaparamita, the mother of the Buddhas. The lovely and the holy perfection of wisdom gives light. You could say it with me. Unstained, the entire world cannot stain her. She is a source of light and removes suffering from everyone in the triple world. She brings light so that all fear and distress may be forsaken. She disperses the gloom and darkness of delusion. She herself is the eye of vision and wisdom. She has clear knowledge of her own being and all dharmas, the perfection of wisdom of the Buddhas, the mother of all Buddhas. And then we go into the first nuns, honored ones, Mahaprajapati, and so forth. So I was just kind of astonished to find that many of the words are from this original text, from this chapter. And then I wanted to look more into what is Prajnaparamita, this mother of Buddhas. So I just think this is a little bit Dharma geeky, but bear with me. I think it's beautiful to read from the original. Where does this come from? And I'm not even sure, Mershi, maybe you know who took it from this text and made it part of our lineage chant. Shariputra says, so much of the Prajnaparamita Sutra in 8,000 lines is a conversation between Subhuti, Shariputra, the Buddha, and other bodhisattvas. It's this interesting dialogue. So Shariputra says, the perfection of wisdom, O Lord, speaking to the Buddha, is the accomplishment of the cognition of the all-knowing. The perfection of wisdom is that state of all knowledge or omniscience. So it is, Shariputra, as you say, the Buddha says. And then Shariputra just kind of goes into this rhapsody. And after it, the Buddha kind of says, what was that about? And he says, praising Prajnaparamita is the holiest of holies and so forth. But this was the spontaneous kind of song that he gave in the middle of this text. Shariputra says, the perfection of wisdom gives light, O Buddha. I pay homage to the perfection of wisdom. She is worthy of homage. She is unstained. The entire world cannot stain her. She is a source of light, and from everyone in the triple world, she removes darkness, and she leads away from the blinding darkness caused by the defilements and wrong views. In her, we can find shelter. Most excellent are her works. She makes us seek the safety of the wings of enlightenment. She brings light to the blind. She brings light so that all fear and distress may be forsaken. She has gained the 5 eyes, and she shows the path to all beings. She herself is an organ of vision. She disperses the gloom and darkness of delusion. She does nothing about all dharmas. She guides to the path those who have strayed onto a bad road. She is identical with all knowledge. She never produces any dharma because she has forsaken the residues relating to both kinds of coverings, defilements and those produced by the cognizable. She does not stop any dharma. Herself unstopped and unproduced is the perfection of wisdom. She is the mother of the bodhisattvas on account of the emptiness of own mark. As the donor of the jewel of all the Buddha Dharmas, she brings about the 10 powers of a Buddha. She cannot be crushed. She protects the unprotected. And with the help of the 4 grounds of self-confidence, she is the antidote to birth and death. She has a clear knowledge of the own being of all dharmas, for she does not stray away from it. The perfection of wisdom of the Buddhas, the Lords, she sets in motion the wheel of the Dharma. Isn't that beautiful? So, who is that? Wouldn't we like to get to know her, the mother of all Buddhas? And fortunately, we can. And this is a little bit in the spirit of my alma mater, St. John's College, where we go to the original texts and just try to read, as much as we can. Of course, most of it is in translation into English, but trying to read some of the original words and to just make an acquaintance with, become friends with the original as close as we can get to the original. Because of course, books and commentaries abound, talks like this abound, and there are wonderful, beautiful ways that other people have kind of brought their understanding to others. But to actually puzzle through some of the verses and some of the text, maybe all of it, I think can be quite valuable, has been for me. And so tonight, I wanted to look at some of this sutra. We'll talk a little bit about the history and context, but then to give a small taste of what it's like to sit with a text like this. Okay. So the Prajnaparamita Sutras are a kind of some of the earliest, what they call the Mahayana Sutras. So the Buddha's death was around 300 to 400 to 500 BCE. And the first Mahayana Sutras came about around 100 BCE. So, and these, a lot of them were, the first ones were they called proto-Mahayana texts. And then really, perhaps the first truly Mahayana text was this Prajnaparamita Sutra in 8,000 lines. And the Prajnaparamita literature is this whole kind of corpus of texts that go from, there's the 8,000 line, the 25,000 line, the 100,000 line, and then in the other direction, you've got the 300 line, which is known as the Vajracchedika or Diamond Sutra. And then you've got the Heart Sutra, which is like 17 or 25 lines, depending on the rendition. And you even have the single syllable Prajnaparamita Sutra, which contains everything, so they say. And so, 100,000, like what does that mean? So this book is the 8,000 lines, and probably about that much is the actual text. So that's 8,000, and lines means a sloka, 32 syllables. So it's not really it's kind of just a number of characters or syllables in Sanskrit. So you can imagine the 100,000 would just be a whole bunch of books. And so the first one, they say, and this was the only translation that really I could find and that I think is out there in English is the Kanz. I think it's Kanz. Is it Kanz or Kanzi? Does anybody know? I tried to find out. Kanze? Okay, Kanze. So the Kanze, which was done in 1973 and then edited in 75, I guess is the only one that's really been done of its kind. And he did marvelous work on many different texts, and a lot of the Prajnaparamita texts. And to read his introduction, which I had to read a few times, like at least 3 times, to understand, what is he talking about, is its own sort of Prajnaparamita text. But it's very interesting to understand some of the context. And what's so beautiful about reading these sort of historical introductions is to be reminded that it's not like the 8,000 line Prajnaparamita was a book written by a person at one go, like you'd get a book off the bookshelf. It's this living document, or was living for what, 2,000 years, over 2,000 years, that started as one thing, was added to here, was redacted there, was translated 7 different times into Chinese, and those different translations made their way back. It was this whole conversation just about that text. And so the different parts of the text, according to him, to Kanze, were coming from different periods of time. And like different people were commenting on them and putting them in different orders. And so just to feel that kind of, oh wow, it's all just, it's one thing, and it's also lifetimes and lifetimes of people's work and activity and practice. And so one of the things I didn't know about was this, the Prajnaparamita Ratnaguna Samchayagata, or Ratnaguna for short, is the verse summary of the 8,000 lines. The 8,000 lines, Ashta Sahasrika Prajnaparamita, or Ashta for short, the 8,000 line Prajnaparamita Sutra. So these verse commentaries, he says, actually probably came before historically. They're in a kind of a different dialect, and they're not in pure Sanskrit. And so you've got these 32 chapters in these short verses, this poetic form that they call the verse summaries, but were really probably the seeds that from which the Ashta itself came. The 8,000 lines came as a sort of a greater explication. And they don't map on perfectly, and that's part of the living nature of it. Both of them have 32 chapters, the verse summaries and the 8,000 lines. But the chapters don't line up perfectly, and some parts of, I think, almost half of one part isn't represented in the other. And so to really look at what are they doing here and what's the conversation would be a lifetime's work at least. And so I really am just looking at like the first 1 or 2 chapters of 32, and mostly of the Ratnaguna, and then a little bit of the Ashta. Okay, so we're not trying to go through the whole thing. Senko might do that next week. We'll see. But yeah, it's been a wonderful kind of foray. And you'll see as often as it often is with texts like this, these original texts, you can't just read it like a book or a novel that you'd pick off the shelf. You start reading it a little bit like Dogen, right? You start reading it and there's just, what? The words don't, like, what does it mean? And so it takes a little work okay, you have to look up 5 different words in just one paragraph, and you have to sort of piece it together and okay, maybe that's what it means. But of course you don't know. It could mean many things. And so that's part of the fun of sitting with a text like this. But the real beauty of it is that the content is speaking to something that's ultimately unspeakable, that's ultimately can't be said. And so as you're going through it, as you're trying to understand the words, you're also getting like hits of this experience of non-conceptual something, right? So before I talk about that too much, let's just dive in a little bit and look at the Ratnaguna. So I wanted to jump into the beginning, but then it kind of felt like, or jump in, past the beginning. It felt a little like it's respectful to really start at the beginning. So I'm just going to read a couple of the verses, and then we'll just look closely at verse 5. So this is the beginning of the verse summary of the 8,000 lines, which historically comes before, according to Kanze. Call forth as much as you can of love, of respect, and of faith. Remove the obstructing defilements and clear away all your taints. Listen to the perfect wisdom of the gentle Buddhas, taught for the weal of the world, for heroic spirits intended. The rivers all in this rose apple island, which cause the flowers to grow, the fruits, the herbs, and trees, they all derive from the might of the king of the Nagas, from the dragon residing in Lake Anopatapta, his magical power. Just so, whatever dharmas the Jina's disciples establish, whatever they teach, whatever adroitly explain, concerning the work of the holy, which leads to the fullness of bliss, and also the fruit of this work. It is the Tathagata's doing. For whatever the Jina has taught, the guide to the Dharma, his pupils, if genuine, have well been trained in it. From direct experience, derived from their training, they teach it. Their teaching stems but from the might of the Buddhas and not their own power. So this is speaking to who's going to start talking right now is Subhuti, and saying that, oh, Subhuti, who's about to give this teaching, is equal to the Buddha in being able to explain it. So don't worry, the Buddha's not giving this teaching, it's Subhuti, but it's just as good. It's kind of what that's saying. So here's where we get into the nitty-gritty. The basic teachings, verse 5. No wisdom can we get hold of, no highest perfection, no bodhisattva, no thought of enlightenment either. When told of this, if not bewildered and in no way anxious, a bodhisattva courses in the well-gone's wisdom. So well-gone is Tathagata, and courses is the first word that I had to look up. And this word comes up a lot, where a bodhisattva courses in wisdom beyond wisdom. So what does course mean? As with many Sanskrit words, it can mean many different things. But the basic meaning of charati means to walk or to go. It can also mean to act, to practice, to perform. So practicing wisdom beyond wisdom, I think, is the translation that Sensei Kodo uses. So when it says a bodhisattva courses in the Tathagata's wisdom, you can say he practices it, or he or she or they flow with it. They are kind of coursing in it. So I actually really like that kind of, it feels like this old-timey word, coursing and wisdom beyond wisdom, but the sense of it, of flowing, feels really alive to me. In form, in feeling, will, perception, and awareness. So the 5 skandhas. Nowhere in them do they find a place to rest on. Without a home, they wander. Dharmas never hold them, nor do they grasp at them. The jina's bodhi they're bound to gain. So jina is a word for the Buddha, which means victorious one who's conquered, delusion. And so this sense of without a home, without a place to rest, without a place to stand, reminds me of the Tokudo ceremony, where dear Jimon just took a vow of becoming, a home leaver, technically. And of course, I'm a home leaver with a beautiful wife and child and home. And so what does that mean? And I think the sense here is precisely where he's trying to get at. There's no place to stand, right? There's nothing to rest on. So going on, to course in the skandhas, in form and feeling and perception and so on, and to fail to consider them wisely, or to imagine these skandhas as being empty, means to course in the sign, the track of non-production ignored. Okay, this is the paragraph I really want to talk about today. It's dense. Let me read it one more time. To course in the skandhas, in form, in feeling, in perception, will, and so on, and to fail to consider them wisely, or to imagine these skandhas as being empty, means to course in the sign, the track of non-production ignored. So here, when he says to course, it's not so much to practice, right? To course in the skandhas, so to course in the many things that make us what we are, forms, feelings, perceptions, inclinations, discernment, as we say in our chant, to take them as real, right? I think in this sense, to course means to be attentive to treat as real, and to fail to consider them wisely. And so this is the part, the turn, right? What does it mean to consider the skandhas wisely? And I think as we know, the teaching of the skandhas, the heaps, that we're not inherently existent selves, we're a collection of things. And then together, these collection of things manifest in the relative world as this person. And then we call this person Kodo. And, I'm really just a collection of physical and energetic elements. And then the problem is then when I think that, oh, but I really am Kodo, right? I really am what I think I am, rather than a collection of different things. And so how do we consider them wisely? And here's a really tricky part, right at the beginning too, or to imagine these skandhas as being empty. So you say, well, what's the solution to reifying the skandhas as self? Is to see them as empty. Well, are you seeing them as empty, or are you imagining some kind of emptiness of self? Isn't that tricky, right? We get these teachings on emptiness or boundlessness and like, okay, drop, attachment to self, drop self-clinging. And then you're like, you have this idea of what that means. And they're saying right here at the beginning, imagining the emptiness of something is not the same thing, right? And so this is like, do you know the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail? As I read this, I just feel this over and over again. It's like, it's not just paradox. It's like a paradox upon paradox upon paradox. It's like a spiral Ouroboros. So to imagine these skandhas as being empty means to course in the sign. So sign here is a technical term, lakshana, mark or characteristic or how things look. So to take as real how things look, which is the track of non-production ignored. So non-production, another critical word, anutpada, which means unborn, unproduced, unarisen. So the unborn, we hear this phrase a lot in Zen. That's part of what's so cool about this is you start to hear phrases and pieces that are used in koans and in Dogen and start to feel the interconnectedness there. So the unborn, anutpada, it's almost like the whole teaching of dependent origination is in that word. Because nothing is born, basically, is the teaching. Everything is unproduced. So whatever you have, the sheet of paper did not just come out of nowhere. It wasn't just a sheet of paper out of nowhere. It was something else first. It was the pulp. Where's Monchen? She knows about paper making. It was the wood pulp. And before that, it was the tree. And before it was a big tree, it was the carbon in the air. And it was the sunlight that gave it energy. And what was that before? And so the sheet of paper itself is unborn because every part of it is dependently co-arisen. And so everything like that is anutpada. It's ultimately unborn. And so this phrase, the track of the unborn ignored, the track of non-production ignored, when you course in the sign. So when you take the appearance of things to be reality, there is a piece of paper, it exists independently, it has causal efficacy and so forth, it's easy to forget the completely dependent nature of this one thing, not to mention ourselves and everybody else, right? And so they're saying here, Prajnaparamita is saying here, to imagine the skandhas as empty. What that means is to take the appearance as reality and to ignore the interdependence of all things, right? Okay, so I'll read it again now without commentary and see if you get a feel for this. To course in the skandhas, in form and feeling and perception, will and so on, and fail to consider them wisely, or to imagine these skandhas as being empty, means to course in the sign, the track of non-production ignored. Okay, with me? All right, good. But when, it goes on, and we won't go so into detail, but just to give a little follow-up on that feeling. But when he does not, when the bodhisattva does not course in form and feeling or perception, but wanders without a home, remaining unaware of coursing firm in wisdom. Their thoughts of non-production, then the best of all calming trances cleaves to him. So this is interesting thing that comes up a few times of their unawareness of of their own coursing in Prajnaparamita, right? So this is the part where like you can't get attached to the idea of emptiness, right? You don't even, if you're really doing it, if you're really coursing in prajna, you don't even know you're coursing in prajna, right? Or you don't even, maybe I should say, you don't even think you're coursing in prajna. So maybe part of you knows, but not in the way that you could like then, like, oh yeah, I was coursing in prajna, you know. I can't wait for someone to come into Daisan and be like, what's your practice? Coursing in prajna. Good, good. How do you do that? Well, that's what this is all about, right? Through that, the bodhisattva now dwells tranquil in himself, their future Buddhahood assured by antecedent Buddhas. There's a tradition of when you've reached the kind of final stage of being a bodhisattva, then you're basically guaranteed Buddhahood, but you intentionally delay it for endless time until all other beings are free of suffering and are about to become Buddhas. And then I suppose all the Buddhas and all the Bodhisattvas then awaken together or something like that. But that's the Buddhahood assured by antecedent Buddhas. Whether absorbed or in trance, or whether outside it, he minds not. For of things as they are, he knows the essential original nature. So there is a sense of knowing here, knowing how things really are. And that means, I think, the dependent origination of things. But again, as soon as I say that, I'm like, no, that's wrong. Those are words. How do we experience it? And there's, throughout the text, I'm looking for, what do you actually do, right? We want to know, what's the practice? What do you actually do here? And again, it's just not this, not this, not this, right? Coursing thus, he courses in the wisdom of the Sugatas, another epithet of the Buddhas. And yet he does not apprehend the dharmas in which he courses. This coursing he wisely knows as no coursing. That is his practice of wisdom, the highest perfection. Mm. The 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 idea of being a bodhisattva here. What time is it? Am I going? Oh my gosh. I'm sorry. Wow. Okay, you're gonna have a lot to talk about. Um, all right. The last verse of the first chapter of the Ratnaguna of the verses. All words for things in use in this world must be left behind. All things produced and made must be transcended. The deathless, the supreme, incomparable gnosis is then one. That is the sense in which we speak of perfect wisdom. So all things left behind, all things transcended. So I want to briefly touch into this analogy that I spoke about a long time ago, and I bring up from time to time, and the reason for this lighting. And that is the metaphor of the rainbow. So as Dinan so helpfully reminded me, when we chant in the Heart Sutra, and we say, Shiki soku ze ku, ku soku ze shiki. That's when we say, form is emptiness, emptiness is, or form is boundlessness, boundlessness is form. And this word shiki is si in Chinese, and it means form, and it also means color. Isn't that cool? So we could also be saying color is boundless. Boundlessness is colorful. So you think of that next time we're chanting the Heart Sutra. So here's a rainbow gradient. And the printer doesn't do a very good job. It actually is doing exactly what I'm saying, trying not to do, which is cut it up into pieces. But the sense here, if you can kind of imagine, is a perfectly even gradient that has no divisions, right? So that's what a rainbow really is. Maybe more like that. But just like that, actually, because our eye, and this is just a geeky side note, that because our eyes have three colors of cones, the way our brain is processing it is actually in divisions, and then it gets mixed together once again. But that aside, let's pretend that we can experience a perfectly smooth gradient of color. This is reality, right? And when we want to talk about reality, what do we have to do? So we say, okay, well, where's green? So there's green, right? Well, what about that? Is that green? How about just a little bit to the right? Yeah, that's also green. What if we get all the way to here? That's more like chartreuse or getting near yellow. I don't know. Is that chartreuse? I don't know what chartreuse. So in order to say anything at all, we have to basically draw lines, right? And say, okay, that is green. Now we're going to call that green. And so what we end up with is something like this, right? Now the trick is, can everybody see this? The trick is not that, if you draw lines around this, imagine that there's a bunch of lines there, the gradient's still there. And it's like, oh, that's fine. We're using the lines so that we can talk about, blue, green, yellow, and red. But then we forget that there's a gradient at all. And we think all that's really there are the things that we can say are there. And so then this ends up being what we see. We stop seeing the infinite diversity of the world, and we see only the chopped up boxes that we put everything into, right? And so that analogy for me is to say that these lines are ultimately empty. These lines don't exist except in our minds as concepts. So everything that we say, everything even that I've said tonight, are conceptual, are ways of communicating. But the danger of that is that as soon as we communicate something, then the idea you might have in your head when I say red, and I'm thinking one thing, and we're agreeing on it. Oh yeah, that's red over there. Oh, that's red over there. Huh, red is on both sides of the spectrum. That's interesting. They don't look the same in the gradient. And so you can see how confusion might arise. And so emptiness is, and when I first talked about this, I think I called the talk painting boundlessness. And because I love the translation of ku or shunyata as boundless, which is Kaz and Roshi's translation for our Heart Sutra. Because empty, like what do you think of when you think of the word empty? Sort of like blank, right? Blank or black or kind of clear. What about boundless? Maybe more like blue sky. And actually ku is related to the word sky. And so when we say that reality is empty of inherent existence, there aren't inherently any single colors in reality, we mean that they're boundaryless too. So shunyata, emptiness, pratitya samutpada, which is dependent origination, are two sides of the same coin. Because if things are empty of inherent existence, they are completely dependently co-arising. Right? There are no things in themselves. So what is the practice here? What is the takeaway? And apologies, I'm not even going to read from the Ashta, which is, I'll leave it to Senko. I know you have to. It's interesting, actually. I felt more drawn to the Ratnaguna as this kind of verse form, this beautiful way of diving in, and the Ashta then kind of explains things more, which kind of makes things even more confusing in a way and takes more research. And so I'd like to sit and study a lot more with the Prajnaparamita. And so just to confess that's as far as I got, was the first two chapters. And I hope that sharing some of this enthusiasm can give you some enthusiasm as well. So negation, right? Everything keeps coming to, this is not it, this is not it. There's no place to stand. You have to leave um, uh, leave the attachment to a standpoint, right? Like, and so there's so much that can be said, and there are warnings here, right, about um, taking emptiness as this kind of thing that then we can apply to the world and do. And that's not the feeling. Like if you're really practicing in this way, as it says in this text, you actually feel tender and connected, right? When you and so I think, and this is just now my personal opinion, how do we practice with this? How do we use this in life? Is to take moments, whenever we can, really, to try and relax those hard lines around the boxes that we put each other in and ourselves. And so when we're with someone who we think is this, oh, they're a conservative or they're a progressive or they're this voter or that voter, it's like that's like the only thing we can see sometimes. And so without negating that as relatively true, because there is relative truth. I am called Kodo and so forth. There's so much more to people than that. And the faith I have, and I think comes from this teaching, is that when we can relax those boundaries, when we can, you know, try to be in touch with what's more about someone or something or the world than what we think, then we actually become more effective at the relative way of being. We're able to connect with someone because we can find common ground instead of both just being at total opposition. What's the good of this teaching? I mean, I would say that I would posit, theorize that all of the violence and conflict, I won't say all, but like a lot of it is caused by clinging to the concepts and lines and opinions that we think are real. That's not to say we don't fight for what we think is right and that we don't show up and be active, be engaged in the world. But perhaps, and I think this is, you know, what a lot of what Roshi Joan teaches and engaged Buddhism is all about, is that by practicing this deep letting go of clinging to ideas and lines and concepts, only through that can we be truly effective in engaging with the world and bringing about the peace that the Bodhisattva enjoys. So that's it for me for now. And I hope we can continue to talk about Prajnaparamita.